A Florida judge who decided to keep eviction hearings moving in local court in spite of the CDC Eviction Moratorium has had her decision upheld by a court of appeals. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's coming out of Florida, okay? And as you know, Florida is one of those places where, a lot of these rules and regulations that have come about during the pandemic have been pushed away, okay? They're just not complying with a lot of this stuff that's going on that's coming down from the federal government, and I'm glad because some of this stuff is simply put illegal, unconstitutional. And in this case in particular, this local judge in Florida decided that the CDC's eviction moratorium was unconstitutional and she just wasn't going to follow it, and decided to keep those eviction hearings rolling anyway, in spite of it. So I'm glad that she did that. I mean, taking a stand like that, it's too bad that there weren't more people out there, who were saying the same thing. But, one is better than none, right? And so, the article I'm going over today actually goes over more of this case, because apparently they appealed this decision to the Court of Appeals in Florida, saying, hey, this judge was, breaking the rules and shouldn't be able to do this. But before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below, and let me know what you would have done if you were a judge in this situation. If they came up with a federal law that you personally believed was unconstitutional, just like, the eviction moratorium, and they told you to, hey, you have to close your courts down, close down all the evictions, would you comply, or would you take a stand like this judge here did? I mean, it takes a lot to take this kind of stand, so I'll give this judge some credit. So let me get into this article. It's coming from the Pensacola News Journal, and it says, Appeals Court upholds Escambia County judge's ruling to allow evictions in pandemic. All right, let's see what it says. A Florida appeals court has upheld an Escambia County judge's ruling to keep eviction proceedings moving in local court, despite a federal moratorium. Most of the country adhered to a Centers for Disease Control and Prevention eviction moratorium that was in place between September 2020 and July 2021 that prevented landlords from evicting tenants who were unable to make rent payments due to the impacts of COVID-19. But First Circuit Court Judge Patricia Kinsey determined in a November 2020 local case that the moratorium rose to levels of government overreach, and eviction cases in the First Circuit continued. Attorneys for the tenant in the case appealed Kinsey's ruling, but last week, the First District Court of Appeals affirmed the decision. Yeah, I mean, this judge stood up and said, hey, this is government overreach, okay? The government does not have the power or the authority to put into place this sort of eviction moratorium. And of course, the tenant's attorney was like, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. But when it comes down to it, if we're talking about a president putting in place a law that goes against the Constitution of the United States, I mean, you have to say to yourself, hey, this is unenforceable. We cannot enforce this without breaking the Constitution. And I wish that governors of states, judges, I wish everybody just would have stood up and just said no. Okay? That's all it would have took. Because the White House had nothing to stand on. They had no grounds to stand on. What were they going to do? Take the people to court? And then the second they get to court, the federal judges would have threw it out. You see what happened at the Supreme Court? The Supreme Court threw the thing out because it was unconstitutional. And so, there would have been no fighting it if the states and the local jurisdictions had just said from the very beginning, hey, we're not going to comply. But they didn't. They went along with it, and landlords ended up suffering for a year and a half because of it. In some cases, longer than that for those who are still in places where eviction moratoriums are still going on. But let's continue. Christine Kelly, the legal services of North Florida attorney who represented the tenant in the case, said affirming the judge's decision wasn't surprising after the Supreme Court rejected a proposed continuation of the eviction moratorium nationally in August. She said the pandemic is still impacting clients in her tenant-landlord cases. If it's not their inability to pay rent because of a pandemic-related issue, then they're battling being low income and paying for rising costs of essentials like gas and groceries. We deal with much lower income populations, so most of our clients would be homeless if they got evicted, she said. Well, the solution to that during the pandemic wouldn't have been to put an eviction moratorium in place. It would have been to provide direct rental assistance to landlords. Okay, so tenants would have applied for the rental assistance. They would have gotten that money to the landlords quickly, without a lot of strings attached, so that those people would have been able to stay in their homes. But that's not what happened. Instead, they said, hey, tenants got to eat, or landlords got to eat this loss for, months or years on end until we finally get our stuff together and distribute some of these rental assistance funds. But we're not going to give all the landlords these rental assistance funds. We're just going to give the ones who meet these certain criteria, and the landlords aren't going to get all of the money that they're owed back. So, and if you get rid of the tenants, in a lot of jurisdictions, you won't be able to get rid of those or if you you won't be able to get rid of those tenants who aren't paying in a lot of jurisdictions. So landlords are stuck with a bundle of garbage that they put in place, and it frustrates me. It is so frustrating. I'm not saying that low-income people don't need places to stay, but there has to be a better solution than to punish a landlord, okay? There has to be a better solution. Landlords aren't charities. They're not doing this for free. We're running businesses. And the fact that our tenants might be lower income doesn't mean that all of a sudden we have to dig out of our pockets, out of our savings accounts to try to provide them a place to stay for free. Data from the clerk of the circuit court and comptroller's office shows there was a dip in the First Circuit eviction cases throughout 2020. But so far in 2021, there have been 1,368 eviction cases, which is getting back on track to the 2019 number that was about 1,800. Advocates say that steady rate of cases proceeding, coupled with the impacts of COVID-19, has led to an outcry of people desperately seeking housing that isn't available. If you compare it to this time last year, we haven't really seen an uptick in calls from people seeking assistance at risk of eviction. But what we have seen is an uptick of people at risk of homelessness now, said United Way of West Florida Executive Director Laura Gilliam. Well, listen, like I said, man, this isn't about trying to make people homeless or any of that, okay? The homelessness problem is not going to be solved by putting the entire social issue onto the backs of landlords, okay? United Way of West Florida's 211 service, a clearinghouse that intakes clients and refers them to agencies or resources to help them out, has had an increase from between 10% to 15% of calls seeking help for homelessness issues to between 28 and 41% on any given month. The other highest resources needed are help with utility payments and mortgage assistance. I think it's everything. It's people's rents having gone up, affordable housing isn't there, the cost of groceries is up, so money's going elsewhere. A number of things have caused this, Gilliam said. Kelly said the situation is looking more promising now that there are additional avenues for both the tenant to pay emergency rent and the landlord. Oh man, my computer just crashed. But yeah, so yeah, my tablet just crashed on me, but you get the gist of the situation. So basically, the landlords were finally able to evict these tenants because this judge stood up and said, hey, I don't believe that the federal government has the authority to do this, okay? So they were reaching too far. And, it was an unconstitutional law in the first place. And I'm glad that at least in one jurisdiction, they were able to, say, hey, we're just not following this. We're just not going to do it. And right now, their evictions are back to normal. So landlords are able to evict tenants just like normal. But, as for those tenants who are facing homelessness or whatever, that is a completely separate issue. Okay. And If the government wants to provide those people with housing assistance and, rental assistance or even public housing, that is completely different than saying, hey, this landlord needs to house this person on out of their personal funds. Okay, so yeah, good on Florida. I hope if something like this ever happens again, there's more judges like that who step up and do the right thing.